The air in Ethelgard was not merely air, it was a curated atmosphere, a commodity as expensive as the gold leaf that shimmered on the ceiling. It tasted of money and smelled of quiet, floral ambition. Marble floors, polished to a black mirror, reflected the constellations of crystal chandeliers above, each one a silent explosion of light. The hushed clinking of silverware on porcelain was the room's only music, a delicate percussion accompanying the low murmur of conversations about acquisitions and inheritances. This was a world built of heavy, cold things, stone, metal, and the immense gravitational pull of generational wealth. Alistair Finch sat at the center of this world, or at least at the center of his table, which he considered the same thing. He was a man carved from the same expensive materials as the room around him. His suit was a midnight blue so dark it seemed to absorb the light, its fabric whispering of Savile Row. On his wrist, a platinum watch gleamed not with ostentation, but with the chilling certainty of a scientific instrument, each tick a precise measure of the time he owned and others owed him. His face was a mask of handsome indifference, his smile as thin as a paper cut, something that could wound without warning. He saw the world not as a place to live, but as an asset to be leveraged, a collection of objects and people to be appraised and, if found wanting, dismissed. He surveyed the room with a predator's languor. His gaze swept over the bowing waiters, the fawning sycophants at his own table, and the other power brokers scattered throughout the dining hall. They were all playing the same game, he thought, just with smaller stakes. His thoughts were as cold and clear as the ice in his water glass. Weakness was a currency he refused to trade in. Pity was a fool's investment. Then his eyes landed on her. She moved through the opulent space like a ghost, a whisper of a person in a world that screamed. Her uniform was a simple black dress, impeccably clean but showing the subtle sheen of age at the seams. Her name tag read Layla. She carried a heavy silver tray with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours and aching muscles, yet her posture held a straight-backed dignity that seemed out of place, a defiance that was so quiet it was almost invisible. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, accentuating a face that was meant for softer expressions, but had been hardened by some unseen, unforgiving pressure. A deep, settled sadness lived in her eyes, a shadow that the glittering chandeliers could not penetrate. Alistair felt a familiar, satisfying flicker of contempt. She was nothing, a cog in the machine that served him. Her existence was a service, her life a footnote in his evening. The contrast between his world and hers was a chasm, and it pleased him to stand on the precipice and look down. Layla felt his stare like a physical touch, a cold spot on her skin. She had learned to recognize that look. It was the gaze of a man who did not see a person, but a function. For 5 years since arriving in this new, cold country, she had perfected the art of invisibility. She poured water without a ripple, cleared plates without a sound, and answered questions with a clipped, respectful deference that offered no purchase for conversation. She had built a wall around herself, brick by brick, with every condescending glance and every dismissive wave. Inside that wall, she kept the memory of another life, a life of books and sunshine and the scent of jasmine, a life where her voice mattered. Here, her silence was her shield. Tonight, however, the weight of his gaze felt different. It was heavier, sharper. It was not just dismissive, it was evaluative, searching for a crack. Alistair leaned back, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. He was bored. The fawning of his associates, a pair of junior executives named Peterson and Vale, had become tedious. The deal they were celebrating was already old news to him. He needed a diversion, a small demonstration of power to remind everyone at the table and himself of the natural order of things. He would make a show of the waitress. He gestured, a flick of his fingers that was both summons and dismissal. Layla approached the table, her notepad held ready, her eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. "Good evening, sir. Are you ready to order?" Her voice was low and even, a carefully constructed monotone. Alistair did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, enjoying the nervous shifting of his companions. He looked at Layla, truly looked at her, cataloging her worn shoes, the faint line of worry between her brows. He saw a refugee, a migrant, someone a world away from her home, desperate and insignificant. A perfect target. Then he began to speak. The words that left his lips were not English. They were Arabic, but a stilted, arrogant form of it, the kind a businessman learns to impress foreign clients, functional but devoid of soul. "Nan nurid and natlub al-an," he began, his accent thick and clumsy. "We wish to order now." Peterson and Vale chuckled, a sycophantic sound that grated on the ears. They exchanged a look that said, "Classic Alistair, always the showman." Layla did not react. Her expression remained a placid mask. Her pen remained poised over the paper. Alistair's smile widened. Her blankness was exactly the response he wanted. It was confusion. He was sure of it. He continued, his voice growing louder, more performative, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. He pointed at the menu with a thick finger, naming the most complex dishes, deliberately mispronouncing some words while affecting an air of perfect fluency. "Lil bidaya, urid salatat al-tabule, walakin bidun kathir min al-burghul," he declared, ordering the tabbouleh but with little bulgur. He then ordered for his guests a cascade of poorly pronounced Arabic for lamb chops, grilled sea bass, and roasted vegetables, adding complicated and unnecessary modifications to each. "Walil sharab, zumuruda min afkhar al-nabidh al-ahmar ladaykum." A bottle of your finest red wine. The performance was complete. He sat back, folding his hands over his stomach, the conquering hero. The entire room was now watching. The air was thick with a mixture of cruel amusement and uncomfortable silence. Peterson snickered openly, while Vale tried to hide his grin behind a napkin. They were all waiting for Layla to crumble, to stammer in broken English that she did not understand, to fetch a manager, to prove herself as small and powerless as Alistair had decreed her to be. He had made his point. He was a man of the world. She was just a waitress. Layla stood in the center of that silence for a long moment. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, 100 tiny needles on her skin. She saw the smirk on Alistair's face, the expectant cruelty in his eyes. He thought this was a game. He thought he was mocking her language, her origin, her very existence. He had taken something that was hers, something from the sun-drenched courtyards of her memory, and twisted it into a weapon to humiliate her. A familiar hot wave of anger and grief rose in her chest. For a second, she was not in this cold, gilded room. She was back in her lecture hall at the University of Damascus, the afternoon light streaming through the high-arched windows, the smell of old paper and dust motes dancing in the air. She could hear the eager, questioning voices of her students as she explained the intricate beauty of a Mutanabi couplet. Her voice had been her instrument, a tool for sharing knowledge and beauty. Here, it was a liability, something to be hidden away. Until now, he had pushed too far. He had trespassed on sacred ground. Her spine straightened, a subtle shift that went unnoticed by most. But Alistair, watching closely, saw it. The shield of her invisibility dissolved. She lowered her gaze from the spot on the wall and looked directly at him. For the first time, he saw what lay beneath the weary resignation in her eyes. It was not sadness. It was fire. She took a small, deliberate breath. When she spoke, the room, which had already been quiet, fell into a profound, echoing silence. Her voice was not the clipped, serviceable tone she used for taking orders. It was a voice transformed, imbued with a resonance and clarity that seemed to make the crystal on the tables vibrate. And the language she spoke was not the clumsy, functional Arabic Alistair had used. It was the Arabic of scholars and poets, flawless, classical, and devastatingly pure. Bikuli surur ya Sayyidi, she began, her tone as smooth and cool as river stones. With the greatest pleasure, sir. Alistair's smirk faltered. It was a subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it was there. That was not the response he had anticipated. Layla continued, her eyes holding his, refusing to let him look away. She did not look at her notepad. She recited his entire convoluted order back to him from memory, her pronunciation perfect, her cadence lyrical. She repeated his modifications, his specific requests, each word a perfectly placed stone, building a monument to his folly. Then she did something more. وَسَأُحْضِرُ لَكُمْ النَّبِذَ الَّذِي طَلَبْتُمُ, she said, confirming the wine. لكن هل تسمح لي أن أقترح شيئا؟ اللغمة التي اخترتمها قوية جدا وربما يفضل معها نبذ أخف قليلا. واحد يكمل ولا يغطي على نكهتها الغنية. And I shall bring the wine you requested. But if you would permit me to make a suggestion. The lamb you have chosen is quite robust, and perhaps a slightly lighter vintage would be preferable, one that complements rather than overwhelms its rich flavor. It was a simple, professional recommendation, the kind any good sommelier might make. But delivered in that language, with that authority, it was a cataclysm. It was a shift in the very foundations of the room. She was not just a waitress. She was an expert. Alistair was frozen. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of chalky disbelief. Peterson and Vale stared, their mouths slightly agape, the laughter dead on their lips. Layla was not finished. She allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips, a smile that did not reach her fiery eyes. Wa bi khususi talabikum lil tabule, she added, her voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone, as if sharing a secret between equals. في لغتنا الجميلة الجملة الصحيحة تكن بدون الكثير من البرغول باستخدام التعريف خطأ صغير لا يعرفه إلا أهل اللغة. And regarding your request for the tabbouleh, in our beautiful language, the correct phrasing would be bidun al-kathir min al-burgul, using the definite article. A small error, one only a native speaker would notice. It was done. She had not raised her voice. She had not insulted him. She had simply corrected him. She had taken his crude weapon and revealed it to be a child's toy, and in doing so, had unveiled her own arsenal, an intellectual and cultural depth he could not have imagined in 1,000 years. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had inverted, turning the entire social order upside down with the weight of a few perfectly enunciated syllables. Alistair Finch, the master of the universe, sat speechless, publicly dismantled by the waitress he had tried to make his fool. He was exposed, his arrogance revealed as nothing more than profound ignorance. He was the punchline. The silence that followed was a living thing, a palpable presence that filled the space between the tables. It was the sound of a world being remade. Alistair's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions: shock, rage, and a deeper, more terrifying feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood: shame. His entire identity, built on the unshakable foundation of his own superiority, had been fractured. From a nearby table, a man rose slowly to his feet. He was older, with a deeply lined, dignified face, and wearing a traditional thobe and gutra of pristine white. He was Sheikh Hamad Al-Jamil, a titan of industry from Abu Dhabi, a man whose respect Alistair had been courting for 6 agonizing months. The multi-billion-dollar infrastructure deal they were meant to finalize next week was the crown jewel of Alistair's 5-year plan. The sheikh ignored Alistair completely. His eyes were fixed on Layla, and his expression was one of profound, undisguised respect. He addressed her in the same high, classical Arabic she had used, his voice a rich baritone that commanded immediate attention. "Ya Sayyidati," he began, inclining his head slightly, a gesture of deference that sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. "Masha'Allah. Balagatuki fi al-luga ka nahrain min al-asal wal-hikmah. Min aina anti?" "My lady, God has willed it. Your eloquence in the language is like a river of honey and wisdom. From where do you hail?" Layla's composure, which had been a suit of armor, softened for a moment. To be addressed with such respect, with a title she had not heard in years, was like a balm on an old wound. She answered quietly, her voice retaining its formal grace but now tinged with a deep, resonant sorrow. "Kuntu ustadhat al-adab al-klassiki fi jami'at Dimashq, ya sheikh," she replied. "I was a professor of classical literature at the University of Damascus, sheikh." A murmur went through the room as the Arabic speakers translated for their companions. A professor, not just a native speaker, but a scholar. The depth of Alistair's miscalculation was now horrifyingly clear. Sheikh Hamad's face clouded with understanding and compassion. He knew what that meant. Damascus. Professor. The words hung in the air, painting a picture of tragedy, of a life of intellect and respect lost to the ravages of war. He turned his gaze to Alistair. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by an arctic cold that was more terrifying than any shouted rage. He switched to crisp, cutting English, ensuring every single person in the restaurant understood. "Mr. Finch," the sheikh said, his voice dangerously calm, "I have been observing you this evening. I have observed how you treat those who serve you. I was taught that a man's true character is revealed not in how he treats his equals, but his inferiors." He paused, letting the word inferiors hang in the air, heavy with irony. "This woman," he gestured to Layla, "is a scholar. She possesses a wealth you cannot comprehend, a treasure of knowledge and culture that your money could never buy. You tried to use her heritage as a punchline. You tried to humiliate her for your own amusement. In doing so, you have revealed that you possess nothing of value at all." Alistair tried to speak, to salvage the situation. "Sheikh, it was just a misunderstanding, a joke." "A joke?" The sheikh's voice cut through him like glass. "There is no misunderstanding. I see you very clearly now. My corporation, my family, we do business with partners. Partners are built on a foundation of mutual respect. You have shown tonight that you are incapable of this fundamental principle." He delivered the final blow. "Consider our proposed partnership terminated, effective immediately. I will not have my family's name associated with a man of such profound poverty of spirit." It was a public execution. The deal, worth more than most small nations' GDP, evaporated into the perfumed air of the restaurant. Alistair's world, which had seemed so solid, so immutable, began to liquefy beneath him. The faces of his associates, Peterson and Vale, were pale with terror. They were not looking at him with admiration now, but with the panicked eyes of men on a sinking ship. The restaurant manager, a harried man named Dubois, finally arrived, drawn by the deafening silence and the Sheikh's commanding voice. He saw the Sheikh, he saw Alistair's ashen face, and he saw Layla, standing with an unassailable dignity. He understood instantly who held the power. "Mr. Finch," Dubois said, his voice tight with fury, "this establishment is built on respect. I believe it is time for you and your guests to leave." For the first time since he was a teenager, Alistair Finch was being thrown out of somewhere. Security guards, large men in discreet suits, materialized at his shoulders. The humiliation was absolute. He was being frog-marched out of his own world, past the staring, judging eyes of his peers. As he was led away, his final desperate glance was at Layla. She was not looking at him. She was speaking quietly in Arabic with the Sheikh, a conversation between equals, two people from a world he had tried to mock and could never hope to enter. The days that followed were a cascade of failures. News of the incident at Ethelgard and Sheikh Hamad's public repudiation spread through the financial world like a virus. Alistair, the man whose reputation was built on an aura of untouchable power, became a pariah overnight. The story was told in hushed tones in boardrooms and on golf courses, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance. Deals stalled. Partners grew distant. His phone, once a constant source of ringing affirmation, fell silent. He found himself adrift in the opulent prison of his penthouse apartment. The marble floors felt cold and empty, the panoramic city views mocking him with a world that was suddenly turning its back. He drank expensive scotch, but it tasted like ash. He was surrounded by priceless art and bespoke furniture, but for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of their soullessness. His wealth had been a fortress, but the walls were crumbling, and he was left alone with the one thing he had spent his entire life trying to outrun: himself. He couldn't get her face out of his mind, not the blank, subservient mask of the waitress, but the face that had looked at him after he had made his cruel joke. The fire in her eyes, the quiet, unshakable dignity. She had defeated him not with anger or revenge, but with simple, undeniable truth. Who was she? How could a woman of such profound intellect and grace end up serving him lamb chops? The question became an obsession. It was more than just curiosity. It was a desperate need to understand the nature of the force that had so utterly dismantled him. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. It cost him a small fortune, but money was the only tool he knew how to use. 2 days later, a slim file landed on his desk. It contained Layla's story, Layla al-Jamil, a name that was a poem in itself. The report detailed her life: a celebrated academic, a published author of several books on classical Arabic poetry, a beloved professor. It showed pictures of her in another life, standing at a lectern, smiling with students, accepting an award. Then the timeline turned dark. The war, the siege, the bombing of the university, the death of her husband, a fellow professor, and her 7-year-old daughter Amal in an airstrike that had leveled their apartment building. She had escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and a handful of memories, joining the tide of humanity fleeing the wreckage of their lives. Alistair read the report, and the ice around his heart, the ice he had cultivated for decades, finally cracked. He saw the face of her daughter in a faded photograph, a smiling girl with her mother's eyes. He saw the list of her academic publications, titles that spoke of a life dedicated to beauty and meaning. He had not just insulted a waitress, he had danced on the grave of a family, mocked the ashes of a brilliant career, and trampled on the dignity of a survivor. But it was the final page of the report that made him stop breathing. It detailed the various international aid efforts in Damascus, including reconstruction projects. One of them was the rebuilding of the university's library, the very heart of the institution where Layla and her husband had taught. The project was funded by a consortium of international charities. The lead donor, who had provided the seed money a decade ago in a fit of tax-deductible philanthropy, was a foundation Alistair had set up in his parents' name and promptly forgotten about. The irony was a physical blow. With one hand, he had signed a check that, years later, would help rebuild the library where she had lectured on poetry. With the other, he had tried to destroy what little peace she had managed to find in her new life. His life was a meaningless, chaotic tangle of contradictions. He knew he had to see her. Not to apologize. The word felt laughably inadequate, but to understand. He found her through the investigator, learning she had quit her job at the restaurant the day after the incident. She was living in a small, cramped apartment in a part of the city he had only ever seen from the tinted windows of his limousine. He sent a message, not a summons, but a simple, humble request to talk. He suggested a neutral place, a small, unassuming coffee shop near her apartment. He half expected her to refuse, but to his surprise, she agreed. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a small table by the window, nursing a cup of tea. She wore a simple gray sweater, and without the severe restaurant uniform. She looked softer, yet the strength in her was more apparent than ever. She did not stand when he approached. She simply watched him, her gaze clear and unreadable. He sat down, the silence between them as heavy as a shroud. He, a man used to commanding any room he entered, felt like an intruder. "I read about you," he began, his voice hoarse. "About your life, your family." Layla's expression did not change. "And what did you hope to achieve by that? Do you wish to catalog my pain to better understand your victory?" "It was not a victory," Alistair said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "It was the most profound failure of my life." He looked down at his hands, which were resting on the table. They looked useless, clumsy. "I need to understand why I did it, why I am what I am." And so, in the quiet corner of a cheap coffee shop, surrounded by the smell of burnt coffee and the chatter of strangers, Alistair Finch confessed. He told her about his own childhood, a story he had never told another living soul. He spoke of growing up in a tenement, the son of immigrants who spoke broken English, who were ridiculed for their clothes, their food, their very existence. He spoke of the shame, the burning, constant shame of being poor and different. He described how that shame had curdled into a ferocious, all-consuming ambition. "I thought money was the answer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I had enough of it, no one could ever laugh at me again. I built a fortress of wealth around myself, and I became the one who laughed. I became the bully. I spent 40 years becoming the very thing I hated." Layla listened without interruption. She saw the frightened, shamed boy hiding behind the eyes of the arrogant billionaire. She did not feel pity, not yet. But the edges of her anger began to soften. She understood the shape of his emptiness. When he was finished, a raw, painful silence settled over them. The pain of others is not a shield for your own, she said softly, but her words had the force of a judgment. You saw a servant, and you wanted to feel powerful. You never thought to look for the person. She then told him of her own life, not the facts he had read in a file, but the feelings. She spoke of the scent of the jasmine in her garden in Damascus, the weight of a rare book in her hands, the sound of her daughter's laughter. She painted a picture of a world made of light and love and knowledge, a world that had been turned to dust. You think your wealth is a fortress, she said, her eyes meeting his. My fortress was my family, my books, my students. It was built of things that have true value. And when it was destroyed, I learned that the only thing you truly own in this world is your dignity. It is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away. She paused. That night, you tried to take mine. Instead, you gave away your own. Alistair finally looked up, and the raw honesty in his eyes startled her. I know, he said, and I know that an apology is meaningless. Words are meaningless. The only thing that has meaning is action. He leaned forward, his voice earnest, desperate. That foundation, the one in my parents' name, it helped rebuild your library. It was a fluke, a forgotten piece of my past. I want to make it my future. I want to create something real. He laid out his idea. A new foundation, massively endowed, dedicated not just to rebuilding structures, but to rebuilding lives. Its mission would be to help displaced scholars, artists, doctors, and professionals, refugees like her, find opportunities to use their skills and talents again, to give them back the dignity of their work. I can't run it, he said, shaking his head. I'm the problem. My name on it would be a stain. It needs a leader with moral authority, with wisdom, with a soul. He looked at her, his plea laid bare. It needs you, Layla. I want you to build it, to run it. I will provide the money, all of it, and then I will get out of the way. Layla was stunned into silence. It was an offer of unimaginable scope, a chance to turn her own tragedy and his into a force for good. It was a path away from the quiet grief of her apartment and the invisible servitude of the restaurant. It was a chance to build again. It was not forgiveness. It was not justice. It was something more complex, more difficult, and perhaps more meaningful. It was a second chance for both of them. She thought of the thousands of others like her, scattered across the globe, their brilliance hidden, their talents wasted. She could give them a voice. She could give them a future. After a long silence, she gave him her answer. I will do it, she said, her voice clear and strong. But not for you, I will do it for them. And you will not just get out of the way. You will work. You will not be the benefactor in the sky. You will be on the ground. You will learn the names of the people you help. You will hear their stories. You will trade your expensive suit for working clothes. Your redemption will not be bought with a check. It will be earned with humility. Alistair Finch, the man who had commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, simply nodded, his eyes shining with a strange, new light. It was the light of a man who had lost everything he thought he wanted, and in doing so, was finally being offered the one thing he truly needed. 3 years passed. The Al-Jamil Finch Foundation for Displaced Professionals was not just a name on a letterhead. It was a vibrant, thriving reality. Its headquarters was not a gleaming corporate tower, but a converted warehouse in a modest part of the city, filled with light, art, and the buzz of a dozen different languages. It provided grants, language training, professional recertification, and a network of support that was as much about community as it was about career. Layla Al-Jamil was its heart and soul. She was no longer a waitress hiding behind a shield of invisibility. She was a leader, her quiet dignity now a source of immense strength and inspiration. She moved through the Foundation's halls with purpose, her past tragedy not a weight that held her down, but a lens through which she viewed the world with profound empathy and wisdom. She met with prime ministers and university presidents, but she was most at home in the Foundation's library, helping a newly arrived surgeon from Yemen navigate the labyrinth of medical licensing, or listening to a poet from Afghanistan read her latest work. Alistair was there too, but he was a different man. The arrogance had been stripped away, layer by painful layer, leaving behind something quieter, more thoughtful. He had kept his promise. He was not on the board of directors. He held no executive title. His official role was head of logistics, a title he had given himself. He arranged transportation for new arrivals, helped furnish their first apartments, and navigated the endless bureaucracy of immigration and housing. He wore simple trousers and a worn button-down shirt. His platinum watch was gone, replaced by a cheap, functional digital one. He had sold the penthouse, the private jet, and the collection of sports cars, pouring the money into the Foundation's endowment. He lived now in a modest apartment, the kind he had once flown over without a second thought. Some of his old colleagues called him a fool. They said he had lost his mind. But Alistair knew he had been insane before, and was only now beginning to find his sanity. He found a quiet satisfaction in the simple, tangible act of helping another person. Loading a box of donated books onto a truck gave him a deeper sense of accomplishment than closing a billion-dollar deal ever had. One crisp autumn afternoon, the Foundation was holding its annual welcome ceremony for a new cohort of scholars. The main hall was filled with people from dozens of countries, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, apprehension, and hope. Layla stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. Her voice, once used to lecture on 14th century poetry, now wove a tapestry of welcome and encouragement. "You have all lost a world," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of each person. "A home, a career, a life that was yours. Nothing can replace what was taken. But you have carried something precious through the fire. Your knowledge, your skill, your talent, your dignity. Here, we do not offer you charity. We offer you an opportunity, a chance to build again, to share your gifts, to remind the world that a person's worth is not measured by what they have lost or where they have come from, but by the contents of their mind and the character of their soul." In the back of the room, standing by a stack of welcome kits, Alistair listened. He was not watching Layla as a symbol of his failure or his redemption. He was watching her with a simple, profound sense of awe. She was the most powerful person he had ever known. After the ceremony, as the new arrivals mingled, Layla found him by the coffee station. "They're a good group," she said, handing him a cup. "A physicist from Iraq, a concert violinist from Ukraine, a whole family of dentists from Eritrea." "I know," Alistair said with a small smile. "I spent all morning trying to find a left-handed dental chair for the father." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from impossibly different worlds, now bound by a shared purpose. The ghost of that night at Ethelgard was always between them, but it was no longer a wall. It was a foundation stone, the dark, solid ground upon which all of this had been built. "Do you ever miss it?" Layla asked quietly. "The power? The money?" Alistair thought for a moment, looking around the noisy, hopeful room. He saw a child, the daughter of the Iraqi physicist, chase a ball across the floor, her laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged space. He thought of his old life, the silent, sterile perfection of his penthouse, the cold weight of his watch, the emptiness of his own reflection in the polished marble. "I wasn't wealthy then," he said, his voice filled with a clarity that had taken him a lifetime to find. "I was just rich. There's a difference." He looked at Layla, his eyes full of a gratitude that was deeper than words. "Thank you for teaching me that,"